I grew up with a bunch of taboo around people who needed therapy or people who needed conferences or people who read books about your ability to reach for a better version of yourself. But at that point, with that conversation, I agreed to go to a personal development conference. I had a transformational experience there.
Hey there, I'm Goli Kalkaran, and this is Lessons from a Quitter, where we believe that it's never too late to start over. No matter how much time or money you've spent getting to where you are, if ultimately you are not happy, then it's time to get out. If you're feeling stuck and you feel like there's gotta be more, there's gotta be a way to feel fulfilled and excited about what you do, then this is the podcast for you. Each week, I will sit down with an inspiring guest who quit their professional career in order to forge their own path and create a life that they love. Hey guys, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're new here, thank you for joining us for the first time. I am so excited to have you guys here, and I'm so excited about this episode. We have Mr. Dave Hollis on the show, and I'm so honored to be able to talk to him about his incredible journey. But before we get into that, I mentioned last week that I finally got my act together and put together a resource that you guys have been asking me about. The number one question I get repeatedly, weekly, through DMs and emails is, how do I figure out what I should do? Like, I want to quit my job. I want to do something else, but I feel like I have no other skills, or I feel like I don't even know what I'm passionate about. And I went through the same thing. I felt very stuck when I wanted to quit law. I hadn't given myself this time or space to really figure out who I was and what I enjoyed outside of the thing I had worked for 30 years. So, well, maybe not 30 years, probably not when I was a child, but you get it. So I made a PDF for you guys that goes through the 5 steps that I went through in order to really unpack the things I liked and what I wanted to follow. Now, let me give you a disclaimer that this isn't something that like you're going to read in 10 minutes and do one exercise and you're going to figure out what your life's calling is. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. I wish I could give you that, but I can't. So it has a series of different exercises and things that you can do, but they take time, and you got to give yourself the space to really be able to figure out what it is that lights you up. So if you're willing to put in that work, then go to quitterclub.com/PDF. It's free. Download it. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you do it and what you come up with. I would love to hear what you guys are doing. With that, let's jump over to the episode today. It is such a good one. We have Dave Hollis. Dave is currently the CEO of the Hollis Company. I'm sure most of you have heard of him and his wife, Rachel Hollis. But in case you haven't, Rachel is a powerhouse motivational speaker, personal development guru. She has been called the female Tony Robbins. She has 2 current New York Times bestselling books, Girl Wash Your Face and Girl Stop Apologizing. And through the Hollis Company, they are working to help people live their best lives, whether that be through their 2 top-rated podcasts, live conferences, coaching, books, merchandise, you name it. But if you haven't followed them for a long time, then you may not know that Dave only recently joined the Hollis Company. In fact, it's only been about a year. Before that, Dave had an incredible 17-year career at the Walt Disney Company, which culminated in his role as President of Theatrical Distribution. That basically means that Dave was in charge of global theatrical sales for Disney, Pixar, Marvel, and Lucasfilm. During his tenure, Disney had industry-breaking records, such as the first $7 billion year in global ticket sales and the only studio to cross $6 billion 2 years in a row. His job was, by all accounts, the quote-unquote dream. It was high-paying, high glamour. He'll talk about, the Oscars and red carpet events, and highly respected. And yet, we'll talk to Dave about why it ultimately became unfulfilling and how he made the decision to walk away from something that seemingly had been his dream job for so long. His journey is full of inspiration and wisdom about how we all should be thinking about and approaching our own lives and jobs. So without further ado, let's jump in and talk to Dave. Hi, Dave. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's so great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I am so excited to have you. And I cannot wait to jump into all the amazing things that you guys are doing at the Hollis Company. But before we get to that exciting part, what we like to start with is kind of the background in your, previous career. So can you give us a little bit of backdrop into what your career was like at Disney before you left?
So I, as you mentioned, work at the Hollis Company now. We have only been doing this for about 10 months. And prior to that, I spent about 25 years in media. I started at 20th Century Fox. I worked at an agency for a stretch, was in grassroots marketing, and then found myself at the beginning of what was inevitably a 17-year experience at the Walt Disney Company. A fantastic experience at the Walt Disney Company. I spent the entirety of my time in the studio, the film studio business. The first 10 years, I worked in packaged media, first DVD and then DVD and Blu-ray. And then after a bit of strategy work and marketing work, found myself in distribution, where for the last 7 years of my time at the company, I was the head of sales for our film studio. And it was spectacular in a whole host of ways until it wasn't. And that was when it was time to jump.
Well, that's sort of what we want to get into. And I think that, you were in a very high level position by the time you had left. You became president of worldwide distribution. And what you were just saying, I know you had some record breaking years while you were there. And so, from the outside seems like such a glamorous career, and you get to go to red carpet events and Oscars and all this stuff. So at what point does it start not becoming, something that you love? Like, what was there that was not fulfilling anymore?
Sure. I mean, the headline is the job itself is spectacular. It will be, when I get to the end of my career, one of the things I look back with so many unbelievably great memories, in part because I got to work with the greatest storytellers on earth. I got to work with the greatest teams on earth. I had the best leaders. I had the biggest brands. But the things that made the job great were also the thing that ended up making the job a thing that I had to quit. And that was because of the strength of Disney, Marvel, Pixar, Lucas, and Disney Animation, because of what the leverage ultimately was as a salesperson negotiating with a movie theater who couldn't live nearly without, a single Star Wars movie or a single Avengers movie. The thing that made it so interesting and challenging at the beginning of my journey, because I had not had a ton of experience in sales necessarily, and I had no experience inside of the theatrical business, those first few years working as the head of distribution were exhilarating because I was in a position where I could fail on the regular and was learning via drinking out of a fire hydrant on just about every single day basis. And when I, inevitably got to that point where, when I first came into that last job I had, the company had just acquired Pixar and in very short time added Marvel and then added Lucas. And though those acquisitions were exciting and getting to know those teams and how you blend cultures between what previously were separate companies into now a single part of a bigger company, with each of those things happening, the learning curve of that beginning phase was diminishing as the negotiating leverage was increasing. And so I found myself, after probably the first 3 years of that 7-year span, struggling to feel as excited about the accolades that came in having the biggest year in the history of the theatrical business. By the time I left, we had 9 of the 10 biggest opening weekends in film history. And those things at the beginning felt unbelievably great because of how much work it was taking and how satisfying it was to figure out how to do things that you didn't know how to do. And towards the end, it doesn't mean that it wasn't still, like Black Panther's opening weekend is a memory I'll have for the rest of my life. The Force Awakens opening weekend, forget about it, right? But on the everyday, I wasn't having to study as hard or at all to get straight A grades.
Right.
And so as much as there were things that I thought I wanted. But I thought for my adult life, I was chasing certain titles, the kind of, respect or, maybe even at times envy from people who had similar jobs, but not as much powder to work with.
Right.
I thought those were things I wanted. And then when I had them, there was a sense of unfulfillment because of not having to work as hard or being in a position necessarily to fail as much.
I think that is such a common theme that happens with so many people that are climbing a ladder to get to a certain point. And then they get there and it's great, but either it's not what they thought it was going to be and it's unfulfilling, or, as humans, we need growth and you're not growing anymore. And so it becomes unfulfilling. But what tends to happen is we add a layer of guilt of like, I should love this. This is what I wanted. I should, from the outside looking in, everybody thinks this is great. And that keeps so many people stuck because it's like, I've reached this pinnacle now and I should be happy. Why am I not? So like, how did you get over that mindset of being like, okay, I have this incredible career, but it's okay to start something over or to take a big leap or to do something that other people don't understand?
So I had the fortune, the serendipity, the providence of three big things happening in my life at the exact same time. I had the circumstances of a job that had the optics of one of the best in the entire business, if not any business, meeting my not having to try as hard to succeed, and my wife's business that she'd spent 15 years as an entrepreneur building, reaching a tipping point where there was absolutely an opportunity waiting for someone who had wiring like I did on the operational and sales and marketing side of things to step in and help take what she'd built to the next level. And I was moving from my 30s to my 40s. And in the latter of the three, this bridge between my 30s and 40s was really interesting because it was one of those milestone birthdays where I was asking bigger existential whys. Why am I on this earth? Why do I have this potential inside of me that I'm now not in a position to have to use? Why? And I had at the time 3 and then ultimately 4 young kids. And I started thinking about my 60th birthday dinner, which sounds like a very random thing, but I'm turning 40, thinking about the next 20 years of my life. And as my young kids become adults, what around this table, they might raise a glass to toast of what it is about what I've accomplished that they are proud of. And I could see 2 paths. One path of me continuing to cling to certainty, which was for the entirety of my adult life, the number one commodity of my life. Or I could let go of the worry of what people might think of me doing something else, pursue intentionally something where failing was more likely than the current situation that I was in, for the opportunity in the failure or the learning or the friction that comes in an uncomfortable space to grow in the same way that you break down a muscle to build it up. And I could see what they might say about my having chosen the safer path, the thing that the outside world said was good and that would have provided well for our family and that would have allowed me to go to the Oscars or whatever it might be as a member of the greatest media company in the world. Or I could go pursue something that had as its purpose something that might have a different kind of impact, partnering with my best friend and wife and showing my children that in pursuing something that wasn't as certain or at times totally uncertain, that the growth that came from having deliberately chosen uncertainty was the reason why their arms were higher in the air as they were toasting me at 60. So the choice became clear against like visualizing that future and creating leverage against the status quo in a way that made deviating from it the only choice.
Right. I love that. And I think there's so many things to unpack there. And I really want to get into what your wife has created and how that played into this. But one part of that, and if anybody is living under a rock and doesn't know who Rachel Hollis is, I mean, she has created this unbelievable brand and she puts out inspiring content all the time. Like you were saying, she's been doing it for 15 years. It started out more as like a lifestyle blog and has now become really this personal development powerhouse with best-selling books and live events. And you guys are we'll get into all of those amazing things. But you guys are very open about the fact that she had a very tough conversation with you when she was starting her personal development journey, and about the fact that if you also weren't going to be on a personal development journey, then that would cause problems in your relationship down the line, potentially. And I'm just wondering, when was that, and how much was like you actually getting involved in personal development that led to having these existential questions? And really, because I think a lot of people that are in those positions don't ask these questions because we aren't taught to really like sit and reflect on what we want and on these bigger issues, and you get what is quote unquote successful and stay there. So I'm wondering, when you're having these thoughts about your 60th birthday party, how much time had you kind of already been working on this, making yourself better and being in this personal development state by that point?
Well, the good news is I got way worse before I got way better. So as I'm enjoying the spoils of being the president of distribution and the salary or the recognition that might come with it, I descended into what was probably the lowest point of my adult life, which just does not actually make sense. But that disconnect between what everyone else thought and the way that I felt really ended up feeling a bit isolating. And so I did what I do sometimes, hopefully never again, but in the past, reach for things that would help mute some of those feelings instead of for personal development tools that could help me become a better version of myself. And so I would have a little too much to drink at times. I'd put on headphones and take runs that lasted too long. I'd play video. I'd do things to detach from having to feel the things that I was feeling as I was unsatisfied in a way that was compromising me showing up as the husband my wife deserves or the father my kids deserve. And when I was in the midst of this, I never really thought that a midlife crisis was a thing until I was in the middle of one. And I started going to therapy. I love therapy. I really hope that anyone who's listening who has taboo around therapy will throw that in the garbage can and just go sit on the couch of an objective stranger and say all the things. My personal development journey started out of this place of feeling stuck in a rut. And my reaching for therapy was a first step to an attempt to understand the why of me being there. And so as I was in the midst of that work, Rachel went to a personal growth conference. Growth is, as a commodity, the thing that she values most in life. And so she just went on a full, I am going to be a better version of myself tomorrow than today sprint. And in the midst of me being in that funk, I was unable to join her. And we went on a vacation, and it was not a good vacation because I was the worst version, truly, of me, just choosing not to show up for my family in a way that when we returned from the vacation prompted the hardest and most important and best reflection of what love should look like in a relationship conversation when my wife waded into a really tough talk. And it was, hey, I am going to continue to reach for growth every single day. I am going to become a better version of myself every single day. And as much as, yes, I appreciate that you're on this journey to find why you feel the way that you do, this conversation, because it was still early in that therapy conversation, has you not reaching for growth yet. You're not reaching for the tools. You're not doing anything. You're actually, instead of just maintaining a status quo, descending into a worse version of yourself. And I love you enough to ask you if you can imagine if in 3 months, the trajectory that I'm talking about, I keep growing, you keep sinking, makes the date night we have end in a way that we'd want. Are we connecting at dinner? Are we making out afterwards? In 6 months, are we still going on date nights? And in 2 years, are we still married? And it was like, you want to create leverage. That was the gut punch of a lifetime because I just legitimately never contemplated the possibility of not being married. And as much as like I thought that irreconcilable differences was just a thing people made up that, didn't want to work hard in the relationship, we were in the beginning stages of irreconcilability, if that is a word. And it took that conversation for me to say, you know what? Tools exist. I have been skeptical about people who need or use them, but I am just desperate, maybe sounds extreme, but desperate enough that I will reach for them. The first chapter of a book that I'm writing is about a debunking of lies that men believe. And my first lie was that self-help is for broken people. Like, I grew up with a bunch of taboo around people who needed therapy or people who needed conferences or people who read books about your ability to reach for a better version of yourself. But at that point, with that conversation, I agreed to go to a personal development conference. I had a transformational experience there, and I then began to reach for every tool that I could, and it tipped that funk into needing to create some action, including leaving my job and jumping into this work with my wife.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. I mean, I think it is so important because that comes up again and again. I see it with so many people that I've talked to on the podcast or people I talk to that are in these positions where they feel stuck. And so many of us go into like self-sabotage and we don't understand why we're doing the things that we're doing. And because by society standards, we should be happy and we should just stay. And we're so programmed to fear like change that we do end up just like staying and being more miserable. And I think a lot of people relate to that part. And I also think a lot of people really do have those taboos around personal development and self-help and look down on it. And a lot of these buttoned up professions like executives and lawyers and doctors and all these people that have been taught to like, oh, that's like woo-woo, made up stuff. And it's incredible how we, on this podcast, it comes up again and again that everyone's battle, everyone's journey is like 90% just mental. And if you can figure out how to shift your mindset, it's life-changing. So thank you first for putting that out there. For sure.
And you know what's interesting? I mean, the reality too is like I was having like the application of self-help or, anything inside of this space modeled by my wife, who had her journey start. It's chronicled in her books and on her podcast, with her wanting to try and solve the why question around her own anxiety. And so when she found some answers to the why of her anxiety in a way that could take it and have it gone from her life, she went on a pursuit for what else these tools might be able to either accelerate on the positive side or take away on the negative side. And so that was a part of why I started. But, along the way, I'm very much like figure out the why and then find the tool that can address or, take care of whatever's been diagnosed. I'm still in pursuit of answers, and not because of there being anything broken necessarily, but because of there being an appreciation that we're on a never-ending pursuit of growth. If you want to, at least if you want to be fulfilled, there's this crazy, crazy correlation between growing and fulfillment. And the day that you find yourself steadying out or feeling like you're, getting to a static place, you've got to push through and find a way to grow. And it's going to be a trigger usually when you're doing it because you're pushing into something that's new or uncomfortable or different. And that's the point.
Yes, absolutely. And I think actually when you start doing this work and you start realizing that the questions and the growth will never end, it becomes comforting. Whereas before, we're just taught to find answers. And like when you don't have that answer, when you don't know why something is wrong, like you're taught to kind of be scared or, we go into all of these unhealthy responses. But once you start realizing like it will always be a question and you will always evolve and there will be the next question and, that's okay. I think it becomes kind of comforting, like, oh, let me just sit with this for a little bit.
Yeah. Our friend, Brendan Burchard, he's an author and does unbelievable work in this space, but he has a saying, honor the struggle. And it's not an easy thing it's easy to say. It's harder to do, but the more that you can convince yourself, train your brain, have the mindset that the struggle is the way to the better version of yourself, the tools that you may have or the tricks or the coping mechanisms that you may have previously used to try and diffuse the struggle or mute the struggle, seem counterproductive if you realize that in muting the struggle, you're actually taking all of the fruit and squeezing the juice out of it. Like the whole point is the struggle. And if you can see it as that, you can actually sit in it in a way that like brings a great return to you for whoever it is that you're meant to be.
Yes, absolutely. And so what people struggle with is, now going back to where you were, when you start telling, your coworkers or your family or your friends that you're going to leave this position, I have to assume that there are people, whether out of their goodness of their heart because they want you to be safe or, whatever, what their own fears are, start with the like, wait, what? You're leaving? Are you crazy? Did anyone react that way to you?
Of course. Partially because like there's a category of people who have that reaction, and the reaction is a reflection of their love for you, of their wanting to keep you safe or protect you. And that is a very small percentage of the people who have a reaction that is a reflection of that. Most of the reaction is actually, and I can see it so much clearer now than I could in the middle of having the conversations, a reflection of how your departure affects them, right? So like if you were an unbelievable contributor on a team and you tell your boss that you are going to leave them and they have a reaction, the reaction is not about you. The reaction is about the pain that it creates for them to replace you, the possibility that your departure impacts their ability to bonus. Like, it's very much a reflection of their own concern for themselves and self-preservation than it is necessarily a reflection of you. Like I've stayed in contact with a whole bunch of people that were great friends through the years. But of all of the people I was worried about when it came to breaking this news, the overwhelming majority, more than 90% of them, I have not even had a conversation with in the 10 months since I left. And I am 100% certain that they have not given much thought to me, right? Because, and this is a condition of humanity. This is not an indictment on anyone being good or bad. This is just human. We are all, every one of us, every person who's listening, primarily concerned with ourselves. And so if you're worried about what people are thinking about, here's a free break for the day. They're not thinking about you. Right? Like I was worried about what people were going to think about me. And the revelation and the aftermath of my departure was they weren't thinking about me. Right. They were thinking about themselves. And that doesn't make them bad. It makes them human.
Right. Now, do you think if Rachel didn't have this company that you guys were going, that you were saying there was this tipping point and there was this opportunity, do you think you would have still left, like to do something else? Or was it because there was this opportunity that kind of gave you clarity in what you were going to be doing that it made it, okay to leave?
No, I definitely left for the opportunity. Mm-hmm. And if it hadn't existed, I feel, like either one of two things would have happened. I would have finally got the courage up to find something more challenging for myself, or I would have been offered something else inside the company at a certain point. Mm. And my hope would be that I would have been sober enough, happy enough, still married enough to have been the human that deserved the opportunity to go do something in the parks or do something in consumer products that would have been a new challenge. And so I think I, inevitably would have ended up in a different job, but I definitely, the opportunity to do this great work that we're doing together was the catalyst for making a move. And I mean, trust, I'm thankful every day that it happened when it happened, because if I was, 18 months later, still sitting in the, conference room talking about selling a movie that isn't that hard to sell, I don't like the vision of how that guy shows up for his sons and his daughter. Right.
And you talked about, obviously Rachel has been working on this stuff for 15 years and she had already been a best-selling author. And, when she released Girl Wash Your Face, I think You Quit after that was already released. So what's happened in the last 10 months though? It's it seems from the outside, it's funny because a lot of people just learn about her now and think she's like an overnight success, which is laughable. But it seems like it's like skyrocketed. And so is this something that like you guys, you were on the horizon, you saw this coming, or has it like taken you aback a little bit?
So the crazy thing is we made the decision to move. We bought the house that we live in currently 6 months before Girl Wash Your Face was released. And we did it on an impulsive trip to Austin, where in seeing this place that we now live in, I said, I think we have to buy this house today so that we give me the leverage to walk in and quit.
Oh, wow.
And which is like ridiculous, but also like the kind of impulsiveness that we have. And I was at a place where I just knew, hey, we've got to go chase this. Girl Wash Your Face sold almost 3 million copies in the last year. There is not a human being on earth who thinks, hey, this book's going to sell 3 million copies before it comes out. So as much as there was hope that the book was going to do well and it doing well was going to be an anchor for a whole bunch of other things that we might create, there was no projecting that it could do as well as it did. She worked, as you said, she worked for 15 years. Building a community, first as an event planner, then a lifestyle blog, then into the online media space, did some white label content. Like she was building this community for a long, long time. And the book and its success is a reflection of how connected she was to the community and what they wanted to hear her write about most. And not her first book, this happened to be her 6th book. So she had 5 books that nobody heard about, or a few people heard about.
Right.
And then she had, the opportunity to write the book of her heart that was a reflection of the needs of the community that she'd worked inside of for 15 years. Now, the great thing is the book was succeeding at the same time that her podcast was just starting to take off, and new readers of the book were now being exposed to the new podcast. Our now doing this adventure together gave way to us creating a podcast for couples together. And that also attracted some of the audience that was now getting a chance to read the book. Her personal development conference, Rise, was something that had happened before and then happened again. And we taped it and we put it into movie theaters to show people. And because there was more, people talking about the book and now talking about the podcast, there was more appetite to see the movie made in theaters. And it led to, it's like all of these things were kind of just stacking on top of each other. And so the individual pieces became greater than the sum of parts, kind of conversation. And it's led now to more books, and Girl Stop Apologizing comes out and it hits #1 the week that it comes out, and more product and more, live events. And now it's, let's continue to stay focused on the mission. And the mission has always been putting tools in the hands of people that if they use them, they might be able to change their lives. It's been historically very much women, because it was Rachel, at the beginning, providing a casserole recipe to women, because at that point in her life, she had very young kids, and a casserole recipe was literally something that could change her life, because you could put broccoli inside of it and our kids wouldn't know about it. Now, at this stage of who she's evolved into becoming, personal development and growth is a big part of who she is and how she's become what she has, and sharing the tools on either how she's scaling this business or how she's scaled her life are a part of what she's now teaching regularly. And the audience is receptive. I mean, part of it too is there was something unconventional about the honesty and the transparency in what she put out in Girl Wash Your Face, but that was also a big part of what she had been putting out in the online business that she built for the 15 years. And so when we started doing more things that were really honest and in their honesty against the backdrop of super curated Facebook and Instagram feeds, there was a disruptiveness in the honesty that connected us to the real life, everyday problems of basically everybody. And that connection is part of what people in a super disconnected and super divided world are looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. But kind of being, you know, outside of that corporate world for less than a year. And now you're very, like you were saying, you guys have a couples podcast and you're very much, you know, out in front as well and on Instagram and on stages. Do you ever have a hard time with like how personal the topics? I mean, you guys talk very openly about your sex life and your adoption journey and everything that's going on in your family. And, you know, for a lot of people worrying about like what people in their church are going to say or what people in their family are going to say, like, is that an issue for you or have you just gotten used to like, this is the way it is?
At first, it was a huge issue. I had a really hard time. I spent most of my career on the Disney side managing stakeholders, expectations of upper management, or as the every Sunday liaison with the press to make sure that the way that the movies were being positioned perfectly. And as a person who was always trying to control optics, coming into a place that was like, we're just going to take the lens off and let you see exactly how things are and be really honest about things that people don't usually talk about. It was hard more from a muscle memory standpoint than almost anything else, because the success of Girl Wash Your Face it came out in February, we moved in June. Like, we had those few months of time where my mind was being changed by the response to the book, that it was as honest and transparent and vulnerable as it was, and that people were responding to someone finally being comfortable enough to own embarrassing things and uncomfortable things. That gave me a sense of, okay, this can be okay. I probably started with a little bit of kind of being halfway in. And when I started getting the notes from people who were being affected by the work, the impact allowed for the whole way to be a thing we had to go do, or at least I had to go do. Rachel was already all the way completely in, but I started to get notes about the impact that us having a really frank conversation about our sex life or adoption journey or the way we fight being a thing that was making a difference for a couple who were strangers on the internet, made the worry of what someone else might think completely irrelevant, because the opportunity to potentially help a marriage become stronger or help someone who's got some taboo about personal development get past that because it's ridiculous and doesn't matter at all. The impact was the North Star and made the worry of what other people think. If someone doesn't like the stuff that we do, that's okay.
Yeah.
It just means that we're not for them. There's a great quote. I don't remember who says it, but like, you could be the sweetest peach on the entire tree, juiciest, best. And if someone doesn't like peaches, it doesn't mean they're a bad peach. It just means they don't like peaches. Like, there are some people that we are just not the brand for them. And I hope they find the tools that'll help them have an amazing life. That's just not us.
Absolutely. I had this same experience with this podcast. I feel like we focus so much on the negative, like in our fear. We think like all about the bad things people are going to say. And when you start kind of tasting the good things, like when people reach out, it's so overwhelmingly so much better that like any bad thing doesn't even compare. But you don't normally think that before you take the jump. And I think what you just said is also just a really key point and such a key learning, is that it's okay to kind of be half in and half out and test it and then see. I think people think if they aren't already at the finish line and they can't start, like they don't already know how to do everything or put themselves out there. And it's like, just start the Instagram page or start the blog or do what you're going to do and see how it feels. And like that confidence kind of builds as you're doing it. It doesn't just come.
I totally agree. And the only other thing that I would add is be yourself. Like be the parts of you that bring out the opportunity for someone else to see themselves in you. And don't try and be what you think they want. Be yourself. Because I think in this day and age, with as much access and the technology being what it is, like, people are responding to things that feel authentic and real. And if you aren't capable, or you're trying to kind of sell them a version of what you think they want, people are too savvy. I think they can kind of sniff that out.
Right. Absolutely. And like you just said, I mean, there might be a lot of people that are talking about the same things, but there's people that resonate with different styles. And you were saying some people may not resonate with your style, and they might do personal development with someone that has a completely different style. And so there is room for people to be themselves because there are tribes for you that resonate with your message.
100%.
Just getting to kind of the brass tacks, though, of like the business. What has it been like to work as a husband and wife team? Has that been, for the most part, really easy? Or has it been a lot of challenges kind of figuring out that business aspect?
Figuring out the business has been easier because we both have complementary skills. She is the dreamer. I am the executor, practical, pragmatic person now trying to stop killing dreams before she's able to finish sentences. And working together on the whole has been the very, very best thing and the hardest thing we've ever done in our marriage.
Right.
And so, we are legit best friends. We have so much passion for the work that we're doing and the kind of impact we believe is possible, not just today, but truly the thing that we're building and the kind of impact we can have over time. It sounds obnoxious, but we're going to change the world.
Yeah.
And doing that together, being able to do that with your best friend is amazing. At the same time, we're both strong personalities. We both are high performers. We both have had a ton of great experience. And so ego, it plays a really fun role in having husband and wife come together as business partners. She's got enormous pride, as she should have, in having been a female founder and female CEO. And I, having, had the kind of experiences I had over the course of time, if I was going to leave the Walt Disney Company, I would want to leave to be in a position to take on a CEO role. And her coming to the decision that scaling the business and us working together was more important than the ego piece that was involved in retaining her title is like, I have mad respect for her ability to come and say that. And the crazy thing is those titles in a weird way mattered so much when we were making the leap. And today mean very, very little because they were about what people would think. Right. And we don't care what people think almost at all at this point because we're too busy working on this mission to change the world. But the biggest, if you are a couple who works together, my best piece of advice is be excruciatingly clear on a division of labor. I know the things that I work on, the people that have reporting lines into me, the place where my role starts and stops, and know where hers does the same. Is there overlap? Of course. Are there times when something in my lane is something I want her opinion on because I'd still like to make out with her at the end of the day? Yes. But for the most part, there are just two different lands inside of this business. One that's more in that HR, finance, sales, marketing kind of thing. And then one that's very much more in the creative space. And she wakes up every day excited about how to create things that will change lives. And I wake up every day excited about how we can make sure that the most number of people possible are able to receive those tools. That's a good pairing.
Well, that's great advice. And again, I know because it's like sometimes we can idealize or make things seem like very dreamy, like, oh, how cool to work as a husband and wife team. But clearly that can cause a lot of issues. So I think that it's good to know before going into that, if you're going to be together all the time, there needs to be a lot of communication, both at home and at work. And it's easier said than done. So.
Yeah. And I will say one other thing, and this is like a pretty new thing because we have scaled a team. When we got to Austin, we had 5 employees. We now have 25. We have 26 employees. So this is very exciting. We've scaled pretty quick. Our team can never see us as husband and wife arguing the points of why to do something for the business or not. They need to see us as the CEO and founder COO, because if they see us as mommy and daddy are fighting,
right,
that's not right. There's emotion wrapped in us being a married couple arguing in a constructive way about what's best for the business. But in any good company, the chief creative and the chief executive would, of course, have arguments about what's best for the direction of the business. And so we have to create a culture that really is comfortable with ideas like radical candor and being, politely direct and everything else so that you can actually move as quickly as we want to in a way that doesn't have people worried that we're going to get divorced for arguing about the color of notebook.
That is a great point. And what you guys are doing is incredible. I mean, how quickly it is growing and all of the things that you're doing. What would be like your advice to somebody that is in a career that they are quote unquote successful, but they are miserable and they feel stuck and they don't really know where to go from there? Like, do you have obviously people should read Girl Wash Your Face and Girl Stop Apologizing, but any books that helped you, anything that you just think might help someone that feels stuck?
Yes. Well, the first book that I would recommend that had a really big impact on me was Mindset by Carol Dweck. It's just this idea between fixed and growth mindset. And I very much identify as a person who had been a fixed mindset person for a long time. So feeling stuck in a lot of ways was related to my mindset and thinking that I couldn't do something that departed from what I either had created as an identity or that society had developed as a construct that I had to live inside of. So read that book. If you're stuck and there isn't an opportunity, like if your partner isn't writing a New York Times bestselling book that's going to sell 3 million copies, then the thing that I had the opportunity to do just before we made this decision was really lean into mentoring. I brought on an apprentice at one point to teach them how to do some of the things that I was doing inside of my role. Like, find some people that you can show up for and pour into and see what parts of that experience spark the passion inside of you. That's one. Two, think back to the things when you were young, before you had responsibility, that just got you excited when you got up in the morning. Make a list of those things that you would consider to be your personal passions. Put that list aside. Go have yourself a drink, sparkling water, have some wine, whatever you want. Come back and make a list of the things that you think are absolutely 100% the most marketable things that you bring competency-wise to the table. And lay those lists on top of each other. And start asking questions about what vocation, what job, what thing exists in this world that taps both into your personal passions and the things that you're great at. And it doesn't mean that like, oh, good, now I can go be a sportscaster, because that's what mine would be. I want to go be a sportscaster. But dang it, I know there are a whole bunch of places that can use my ability to speak and my love of it, like entertaining. And so if you can find the nexus of those two things and start your search for next from that, the chance that you're going to find something that actually tugs on your personal passion and the things that you're great at is unbelievably higher. And then the last thing, and this is more kind of like on the other side of that bridge from your 30s to 40s for me, reaching for something that was purpose-oriented and impact-oriented has made a massive difference in my why. So like my big, huge, why am I here? My big, huge, how and where can I use this potential that I've been given in my life? Every single time I come back to purpose and impact, that is where I end up getting the most fulfillment. And it's probably where most people do, because it feels like you mattered.
Right.
It feels like what you're doing is important, that it's going to potentially have an effect on someone that can change their life. And that's why we're here.
Absolutely. That's all great advice. But I just want to point out the first thing that you said, I've never actually heard that. And I think that is genius. Like the other stuff, I think all of it is great. We've talked a lot on this podcast about making lists. But what's interesting about the first thing that you said, most people say, and even I would say, go out and get mentors, go out and get coaching, go get people that are going to help you. And I think that is really important. But what you said is like, pour into someone else, like start mentoring other people and see what part of that like lights you up. And that's so important and so genius, because I really do think that we all have like this part of us that we want to help and we want to teach in a way or whatnot. And I never thought of it like that if once you are pouring into someone, it really is easier to see like what parts of that give you energy and light you up as opposed to like drain you. And what a wonderful way of figuring out what your like special skills are.
Yeah. Just having a day where you're going to have the stuff that if you are a person who feels stuck, you're stuck, you've got stuff that doesn't necessarily, pour into you. Be intentional about creating like things that interrupt your regularly scheduled programming that you can both look forward to and that inevitably are about you helping someone else, it's a mind hack. We have a crazy thing about starting your day with what you are grateful for. And we every morning are writing down, be it 5 things or 10 things that we're grateful for. Like, if you can train yourself to be on the lookout for what you have to write down later that day or in the morning, you're going to be on the lookout for gratitude all day. And even in the midst of the muck, there's still things that you're going to find that are going to change a little bit of the way that you feel. And if it's, being a mentor or being, grateful for a small thing, sometimes that's all you need to jump, like a little jumper cable, get you out of thinking that you're stuck. Oh, wait, I'm not stuck. I can go, I can run, right. I can be, I can do. And then next thing you know, you're in the next opportunity.
Absolutely. I could not agree more with that. We had a whole episode on gratitude, and it has fundamentally changed my life. And I do think it's like the smallest step that you can take that will completely change you and change every day.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to do. So everyone should definitely do that. Dave, where can people find you guys and watch your world domination and all the incredible, incredible things that you guys are doing?
You're so kind. You can follow us on the interwebs. We hang out on Instagram and Facebook for the most part. I go by Mr. Dave Hollis. She goes by Ms. Rachel Hollis on Instagram. I'm Dave Hollis and Rachel Hollis on Facebook. We do, very bizarrely and unbelievably different than it was done at Disney, have a live morning show every single weekday at 8 a.m. on Rachel's Instagram and Facebook feeds. If you want to see what freedom looks like, go ahead and turn that on. We have a podcast together called Rise Together. It comes out on Thursdays on iTunes and everywhere that you will listen to podcasts. She has a business podcast called Rise. It comes out on Tuesdays. She's got the #1 business podcast in the universe. We have the #1 relationship podcast in the universe. So good times there. And if you want to watch what it's like to see Rachel Hollis teach on stage, there is a movie that for $0, if you are a Prime member, you can watch today on Amazon called Made for More. But really, truly, every single thing that you could want to know lives on thehollisco.com.
Wonderful. And I will link to all of those in the show notes in case people can't write it down. Dave, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I can't tell you how appreciative I am.
It has been such a pleasure. I look forward to it. Let me know when we can do it again.
I definitely will. Oh my goodness. How cool is Dave? I could talk to him forever. But here are my 3 takeaways. 1, honor the struggle. Ask the hard questions. Do the work of evaluating your life and what you want. 2, nobody is thinking about you. We are all so scared about what everybody thinks, and that keeps us living a life that we don't really want. And the truth is, everybody is just worried about their own lives. So take those risks. Nobody is paying attention. And 3, I loved this one. I've honestly never heard this, and it makes so much sense. But pour into someone else, because acts of service show us where we feel the most fulfilled. It will make it clear where you are needed and how you need to show up in this world. So start giving. I hope you guys like this episode. Let me know what you think of it, and I will see you guys on the next one. Thank you so much for listening. I can't tell you how much it means to me. If you liked the podcast, please rate and review us on iTunes. It'll help other people find the show. If you want to connect or reach out, follow along on Instagram and Facebook at Lessons from a Quitter, and on Twitter at Quitter Podcast. I would love to hear from you guys, and I'll see you on the next episode.